and thank you for joining us for the Neighborhood Entrepreneurial Law Project, also known as NELP web series. We do ask that you put in the chat box the name of your business and the category just to give us an idea as we present. Just to give you a little background history of NELP, it launched in 2018 for individuals and for-profit small businesses. It provides residents of the Palm Beach County area the tools and knowledge to be successful in starting and or owning their small business. Also, we supply limited financial assistance for business registration, logo design, home occupation affidavit, and more. Eligible applicants only. And we furnish webinars and podcasts regarding important business topics, such as the topic for today. I have the pleasure of introducing the two presenters. I will start with Mr. Grasford Smith. Mr. Smith is an equity shareholder with Ackerman, a top 100 U.S. law firm, and his West Palm Beach office. He is admitted to practice in New York, D.C., Florida, and the U.S. Supreme Court. He is listed in Best Lawyers in America and is AV Preeminent rated by Martindale Hubbell. He received numerous other honors, including Corporate Executive of the Year by Legacy Magazine, National Black Lawyers Top 100, Top Up-and-Comer by South Florida Legal Guide, Daily Business Review Rising Stars, South Florida's Most Powerful Black Professionals in Business by Legacy Magazine, Nation's 40 Best Advocates Under 40 by the National Bar Association, and Rising Star by Florida Super Lawyers. Mr. Smith practices complex business and intellectual property litigation and transactional law and has represented a diverse clientele, including Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and elected officials, a Major League Baseball team, and a major online travel retailer. He gained experience at a Wall Street law firm and prestigious Florida firms and worked on Bet the Company matters involving billions of dollars, including contract disputes, shareholder and board of director disputes, non-competition and trade secret disputes, real estate and construction defects disputes, intellectual property disputes, government enforcement actions, and Florida bar disciplinary matters. Mr. Smith is the president of the Virgil Hawkins Florida Chapter National Bar Association, charter member and president of the Epsilon Lambda Chapter of Sigma Pi Phi Boule, life member and assistant national general counsel of Alpha Phi Alpha, president-elect of the Black Chamber of Palm Beach County, and board member of the Palm Beach County Bar Association. Mr. Smith is frequently requested speaker and authored articles in numerous publications. He was featured in the Boule Journal, New York Law Journal, New York County Lawyer, and the Daily Business Review. He also serves on the board for the Legal Aid Society. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our other presenter, Ms. Tiffany Hendricks. Ms. Hendricks is an associate attorney with Ackerman LLP, a top 100 U.S. law firm in its Fort Lauderdale office. Ms. Hendricks focuses her practice on employment litigation and counseling, including overtime and minimum wage, discrimination and retaliation, whistleblowing, workplace harassment, employee leave and reasonable accommodations, employee class and collective actions, and non-compete and breach of contract claims. She represents employers in federal and state court litigation and administrative agency proceedings arising out of alleged labor and employment law violations. Additionally, Ms. Hendricks has experience drafting employee handbooks and policies for employers of all sizes and assists corporate clients on mergers and acquisitions by providing labor and employment specialist review of due diligence materials. Ms. Hendricks conducts trainings for employers on a number of employment-related topics, including EEO and wage hour compliance, as well as diversity, inclusion, implicit bias, and respectful workplace. Ms. Hendricks has also presented at legal conferences on the latest developments in employment law. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Grasford Smith and Ms. Tiffany Hendricks, who will present regarding small business liability during COVID-19.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very gracious introduction. And I want to say it is truly an honor for me personally to serve on the board of the Legal Aid Society. I know that it does tremendous work in Palm Beach County, serving a lot of underserved and marginalized groups. And so I'm really truly honored. And I took the opportunity to be here today with my colleague who is a specialist in labor and employment, because I wanted to have an opportunity, really, as I see it, is an opportunity to give back. So I'm hopeful that something that we say here today will help someone on the call as they navigate what is obviously unprecedented times. And with that, I also want to say, I hope that you all and your families are safe. So I'm going to be talking about things to consider when reopening a business. And I will let you know that our law firm has been effectively, our offices have been closed now for a matter of months. And so we are dealing with the very, very same challenges that we're about to talk about. So this is near and dear to us, and it's personal to us. And so we understand the challenges that you all are undoubtedly facing. In fact, my last day in the office was coming back from a mediation that I had up in the Stewart area. And the office managing partner came to my office with a mask and gloves on and said, "Why are you here?" I missed an email that went out, apparently telling us that we were supposed to go home. So I know that a lot of you all are dealing with those types of challenges. The focus today really is to try to help you to minimize your risks. And I'll say, as a lawyer, we are both advocates, but we're also counselors. And I view this session as really more the counseling side of what we do. And I always tell businesses when I give these kind of talks that there's a front end and then there's a back end. The front end is when you're planning in advance for the various challenges that you'll face. The back end is when you're dealing sort of reactively to whatever you're encountering. And I always explain that the front end is a lot more inexpensive than the back end. If you plan on the front end, you will invariably save more than if you have to deal with the challenges that come from not planning. And as you all know, if you fail to plan, as they say, you plan to fail. So we're on this call trying to help you to plan for the reopening of your various businesses. And I'll just say, as a general matter, as a business lawyer, I deal a lot with contracts. And contracts are about really setting expectations about your business relationships. I think now more than ever, I would encourage you all to make sure that you review your contracts with your employees, with your vendors, with everybody with whom you deal, because now more than ever, you want to preserve as much money as possible as you can. And I think making sure that you don't inadvertently give something away that you don't need to is certainly important. So I would just encourage you to keep that in mind. So in talking just sort of at a very, very high level about things to consider, some of the things I'll talk about briefly is, how will you communicate with your workforce? Again, how will you communicate with your workforce? Do you have policies and procedures for functioning in this new COVID-19 environment? Do you have a plan for how and when staff can return to work? Are your workspaces rather prepared for their return? That's something that I can tell you at my firm we're actively speaking about. Are your managers adequately trained to deal with this environment? And do you have a plan if you're forced to close again? I'm sure many of you are watching Dr. Fauci and some of these other scientists, and they've talked repetitively about the fact that there will be reoccurrences of the virus spread. So you have to plan for the possibility, probably eventuality, that you may have to close again if the government chooses that to order that. So on the communications front, one of the things that my firm has helped various clients with is developing a workplace return to work survey. I can tell you that we're doing that even internally as we return to work. So having a survey is a very structured way of trying to address some of the issues regarding transportation, childcare, or any other concerns that your employees may have. And so having a system of forms will help you in that regard. Also having a system in place for authorizing the disclosure of positive tests for employees that are potentially exposed. One thing I think that you all will probably see a lot of in the future are posters and notices in this new environment about how to address masks, how to address potentially symptomatic employees, and all of that is about stopping the spread. I can share with you that in talking to the office manager for my office, we talked about even removing some of the chairs from the conference room so that there are fewer individuals that can sit down in the room, so you create less opportunities for the spread of the virus. So it's thinking about all of those things that we want to sensitize you to as you look to reopen. Some policies and procedures that you, again, want to start to think about, and as I mentioned before, we've been assisting our clients on this. Wearing masks and gloves. I think that we all know and have all been, I'm sure, adhering to that, but that also may be something you need to employ in your work environment. Disclosures prior to entering the work site for your employees. Cleaning and disinfecting the workspace. Prior to my office, shutting the office, I noticed that our cleaning crews were coming numerous times during the day, wiping down the door handles and other areas that people might touch. So these are the kind of things that you should be thinking about. Who can continue to telework under the circumstances? Well, all of these things are going to be business specific to some degree. But if you have an environment where some employees can be efficient and effective working from home or not having to come into the office, that's certainly something you can consider. I can tell you, having spoken to some of my colleagues, that some of them have said to me, I'm not going back in. This is great. I feel like I'm more efficient. I'm not losing time as far as the to and from, driving to and from work. So there are folks who actually feel that their productivity has gone up. And so that's something that certainly you can look at as you're transitioning employees and looking at your policies. Hygiene related rules, something you're going to be looking at. Requiring sick employees to notify HR and leave work immediately is something that is also important, and that's consistent with some CDC guidelines. So that, again, that's just to sensitize you to some of the policies that we've assisted clients with, and we hope that you consider for your business. Now I'm going to transition to deciding when and how staff will return. As I've mentioned before, those are decisions that will be made based upon the particular needs of your business and the environment within which you operate. There are various businesses that were deemed essential that have continued to operate. So you may not have been in one of those categories. My colleague, Tiffany, Ms. Hendricks, will tell you more about how you can structure those decisions in a way that you can lessen the risk that you could be potentially sued for discrimination. So we want to obviously avoid that. So there are non-discriminatory ways that you could approach making those important decisions. Depending on the needs of your business, the size of the workforce, and proximity of the employees to each other, employers need to consider staggering shifts. Considering technology for large meetings. We're now talking on Zoom, and I don't know if Zoom has stocks, but I may need to try to invest in that, because that's what we're all using right now. And redesigning your office layout. Again, talking about our own office, I've heard discussions about us moving our reception station further away from the entrance, so that there's sort of minimal congregating in that area. We're talking about how you get from point A to point B. So are you going to allow traffic to go only in one direction, or can it go travel in both directions? I think in all likelihood, you're going to want to be unidirectional in how you address the workflows around your office. So it may take you a little bit longer to get to the restroom, but these are the kinds of things that employers need to consider. And now I'm going to move on to talking about preparing the work site. I did mention reconfiguration of workspaces, closure or restriction of use of common spaces, the kitchen, conference rooms, break rooms. Are you going to have any, I don't know what type of plates and cups you have, but maybe now if you had glass, maybe you now go to having disposable cups. I don't know whether you want to have coffee service. Those are all the types of things that you'll have to make in a way that's best for your business. The frequency and thoroughness of cleaning your carpets, floors, furniture. Are you going to provide your employees with sanitizing equipment for themselves, et cetera, et cetera. Now I'm going to move on to something that's critical, which is critical in any environment, which is how you train your managers. You could have all the policies in the world, but if the people who are implementing these policies are not adequately trained, you will not be successful in that. So you definitely want to have your managers, in particular, the people who are implementing these policies, to make sure that they are adequately trained and they have all the legal tools and the know-how that they need to have so that you don't have any issues in the implementation. Managers need to be prepared to deal with employees who have legitimate basis for declining to return to work, but may still want to do so. There's a need to distinguish between job duties and positions that can be performed remotely. I've said that before, but that's also something, again, that your manager needs to be very cognizant of. And understanding privacy concerns as it relates to folks who may be diagnosed and otherwise, I think is something that is important. And I think my colleague can touch on that a little bit more. So I'll end in talking about the unexpected. It's obvious that we don't know from day to day what's going to be happening in this environment. We know in the state of Florida, the governor has been moving to different phases in a return to work, return to normalcy posture. But as I said at the outset, you have to be prepared for the possibility that after you return to work, you may need to go back into a remote environment. So just consider that you may want to continue using some of these tools that we've become accustomed to, because that may help you if you have to go immediately back into a work from home posture. With that, I will pause. We'll have a potential question and answer portion at the end. And I will turn to my colleague, Ms. Hendricks, who will talk about avoiding workplace claims. Thank you.
Thank you, Grasford. Just to kind of reiterate what was said about me in the introduction, just so everyone can kind of know my expertise and and what I do in practice and the kind of advice and counsel I'm giving clients right now during this time before I jump right into my presentation. So just to kind of give everybody a perspective, a lot of my clients right now, businesses of different sizes, from less than 5 employees to national companies that have over thousands of employees in different states, and those types of corporations are dealing with how do they return their employees back to work while also considering state and local laws. So for purposes of the information I'm going to be giving for my portion of the presentation, I'm going to assume that you are a Florida only employer and you are a small employer, not a national size that would be thinking about different states and different jurisdictions. I'm going to mostly focus on what's happening in the state of Florida and the types of rules and regulations that we've been seeing in South Florida between Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties. So with that said, my perspective and my approach is thinking about what are businesses facing right now as they're transitioning their employees back to work in the time of COVID-19. And unfortunately, there is a risk for employers in the space of potential discrimination claims that can arise, and as well as just the regular day-to-day business operations and managing people. And you're also thinking about the legitimate fears that your employees may be facing right now. And I just kind of want to make it known that, like, I understand that this is just such uncertain times, and that it's really crucial that you have your ears to your employees, to your customers, that you're front-facing customers, and understanding that a lot of people have different approaches and emotions as they're going through such uncertain times. And with that said, employers do need to be cognizant of potential workplace claims that can arise during this time as you're transitioning back into it. So a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about are just to kind of help you think about, okay, do I have a plan? Do I have a policy? Do I have a procedure? Because the whole point of all of this is to make sure that you limit any potential liability exposure as a business. And I'm just going to give you some advice, things to be thinking about as you're opening back up business. So these types of claims can come up, especially as you're bringing employees back to work. And when you're making decisions about, which employees should be brought back first, which should be allowed to continue to telework. What about my vulnerable workers? Vulnerable workers, according to the CDC guidelines, they could be people who have pre-existing health conditions. Are you aware of it? What's your policy and procedure for finding out about employees that are vulnerable, that fall into that category? What about my employees, that are 65 and older, or maybe they have a person at home who falls within that category? So even though the employee themselves may not fall into that category, you do have to consider the fact that they may have a vulnerable person in their households that falls within that category. And so they too need to, they're going to have accommodations and requests, and you're going to have to kind of figure out how can I be sensitive to that while also making sure my business needs are met. So these are things that you're going to have to be thinking about as you're making these decisions. And also the importance, and Grasford talked about in his portion, about creating a safe workplace, because under all of this, there's so much fear and uncertainty, and it's really important to make your workforce feel that it's okay, that you have it under control, and that it's okay to come back, and that you have thought about all these things. And also for your customers, if you have a business where people from the public are coming into your offices or your buildings, it's also important to make sure that the customers are feeling safe in the environment. So a way to kind of manage and mitigate potential liability, it's important for employers to plan ahead, and using legitimate non-discriminatory criteria in making the types of decisions that you have to make. So for example, what to do when you're deciding for employees to return to work. So when deciding which employees you're going to return back, you're going to have to think about, okay, what's their position? Senior, you're thinking of maybe like my senior managers, my supervisors, I want them back first. You're going to be thinking about your operational needs, the skill set or performance for each employee. While managers may evaluate, you're thinking about managers and evaluating employees, you also want to make sure that there's a neutral person, if possible. I understand with small businesses, you may not have a full HR department, but it's crucial that decisions that are being made about who's coming in doesn't touch on any of those protected categories. So it's important to think about, am I making a business decision, or could this potentially be leaning towards a protected category, meaning based on someone's gender? And specifically, issues that can come up with is if that person so happens to be a female and they're the caretaker of their child who has no school, who doesn't have daycare, who does not have extra resources for help, you have to make sure that those decisions are not disproportionately affecting the women within your workforce versus the men. And also making the assumption that only women are caretakers. There are some men that are also going to be caretakers for their children, for the vulnerable people in their household. So making sure that whatever decisions you apply for accommodations you apply for a certain group of people, that you don't make any assumptions about other groups of people, that they're applied equally, and making sure that there's a level of oversight over that. So if a supervisor is directly making decisions about who they're bringing in, make sure there's another neutral level person above that supervisor who is signing off. And to the extent you can do that, that is an extra layer of protection to make sure that a second set of eyes reviewed it to make sure that it's applied across the board with all employees. So there's no perception of favoritism or mistreatment in the way policies and procedures are being enforced. And it's also, if possible, crucial if you can have it documented as to why that decision was made, and ensuring that those decisions are tied to a legitimate business need. So it's important for you to think about, one, what is my business need? And who is it that I need critical to be in the workforce? And also thinking about, how can this employee, is it critical that they have to physically be in the building? And if yes, then you can justify that critical need and you can communicate that to the employee. And to the extent that an employee has issues about, working back in the public, or maybe because they have a vulnerable person at home, as I mentioned earlier, having that conversation with that employee to see if an accommodation can be worked out before ultimately making a decision about whether or not this employment relationship can work for the long run during the time of COVID. So it's important to have this dialogue and open communication with employees at all times, just to make sure that you limit any potential liability and exposure for any discrimination claims, or employees feeling like policies are not being implemented fairly across all employees. And so this kind of transitions me into the next part about the discrimination issue. And I'm going to assume that everybody has a general understanding that there are federal, state, and local laws that prohibit discrimination. There's Title VII federal law. Under the state of Florida, there's the Florida Civil Rights Act. Each county has its own civil rights ordinances. And generally, they're pretty standard as far as the protected categories: race, gender, national origin, disability, veterans status. So you have to constantly make sure that everything that you are doing does not touch on disproportionately affecting a group of people that are protected under the law. And so when it comes into COVID-19 territory, a lot of the issues that I'm seeing with my client that are starting to come up tend to lean towards issues of disability. And it's not something that employers are necessarily thinking about, because disability, you may not think that COVID-19 and health and disability could have an overplay, but it does. And so, for example, typically speaking, let's say you have an employee that has a disability that needs a reasonable accommodation. You're thinking, okay, maybe, it could be a physical restrictions that they have as far as lifting things or being able to sit for long periods of time at a job. But now there's an extra layer of health because of a pre-existing condition. That does fall into the category of things that would be covered, medical conditions that would fall within the ADA. And disability discrimination. So you have to consider the fact that this person also has a vulnerable person at home, and that protection can extend to them and their household. So this is a very new territory for a lot of employers, and usually you're only thinking about whether or not your employee themselves has a disability, but now you're going to have to consider the fact that they're going to need an accommodation because somebody else in their household has a disability. So this is all part of the interactive process that you're going to have. And if it comes up, so this is something that may come up that you just want to consider moving forward. And moving into the potential liability and claims, and just kind of what we're seeing coming out of the government right now, there's not a lot of guidance. And right now, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, that is responsible for enforcing a lot of these laws. They're kind of giving a little bit of guidance to employers about how to maneuver through all of this, and especially the ADA issues. And the EEOC has issued guidance recently, and they're saying that the ADA, which also Florida has their own version of disability laws, it doesn't allow the employer to exclude an employee or take an adverse action. Adverse action meaning a demotion, termination, those types of things. The ADA doesn't allow an employer to exclude an employee or take an adverse action solely because the employee has a disability that the CDC identifies as potentially placing him or her at a higher risk for severe illness if they get COVID-19. So you have to, so they're giving us guidance, letting us know that if it falls within a CDC protected vulnerability class, assume that that falls within the ADA disability category, and that should alert you. So it's important for employers to constantly stay abreast of CDC updates, look constantly, checking, even as you're reopening for business, those guidances are still being updated. Make sure you're constantly reviewing to see who are the vulnerable people. Are there new vulnerable people who are being added that you need to consider when you're having these conversations? Because you have to be careful. You can't take a adverse action against those employees because they fall within one of those categories under the CDC guidelines. So you have to think about, am I going to terminate this employee? Why am I going to terminate this employee? Does it have anything to do with them potentially being at higher risk of contracting COVID-19? And if yes, obviously you're going to pause and you're not going to follow through with that, and make sure you took all the necessary steps you possibly could to accommodate this employee, and that you have a legitimate business reason for having to let them go, and that you took every step possible and ensure that that is documented. Because at the end of the day, when I get a lawsuit from a potential lawsuit, my client has an employee that's suing them, my first question to my client is, do you have it documented? Do you have emails with this employee showing that you did everything you could to accommodate them? Did you put it in writing that, they said, mom and dad is 65, has heart disease, has this, and I tried to put her on a staggered schedule. I tried to do this and she couldn't work with me. She wasn't able to work remotely from home. She wasn't efficient. She couldn't come in on this day and this day. If you can show all documentation, you're good. But if you don't have the documentation, it puts it you're in a very difficult position to defend yourself, to say that I had a legitimate reason and I did everything I could to make it work. So that's why I always stress with my clients, document, and it's just to protect yourself in the unlikely event that a lawsuit were to come. But everything I'm telling you today is to prevent you from ever having to be in that position in the first place, because you have a plan, you have the policies in place to limit as much exposure as possible. So these are things to consider as, everything is changing and updates are constantly coming out. And in addition to that update, the EEOC also said that employees, you cannot bar employees unless it poses a direct threat to the employee's health that cannot be eliminated or reduced by reasonable accommodations. And so it's important to make sure you have an individualized assessment and consider how long is this employee potentially the duration of their risk, the nature and severity of the harm to the employee. What are their job duties and the likelihood of them? So every employer is different. Some people just sit in the office, they don't interact with the public. So they're going to be in a category of lower risk because you can control the work environment, making sure everybody's spaced out, making sure there's sanitation. But if you're an employer where they're touching everything that the public is touching, they're front facing, okay, do I need to set up a wall? Do I need to set up hand sanitizer stations for them? So making sure that you're protecting these employees at every level is definitely crucial. Another thing to also think about are employees that have kids. With the fact that schools are closed now school year is about to be over, childcare responsibilities, potential issues regarding family responsibilities, discrimination. it's not formally recognized under the law, under federal and state law. However, Title VII Equal Pay Act and other areas of the law can be triggered when coming into play when you're thinking about, childcare responsibilities at home. And the new Families First Coronavirus Protection Act, which covers employers who are fewer than 500 employees, it does provide employees with, provides rights to employees who are unable to work or telework for reasons including that the employee needs to take care of an individual subject to a quarantine. So there are protections under the new Family First Coronavirus Act that does extend protections for your employees who have to stay home with somebody who's being quarantined. Also protections to care for a child who's under the age of 18 years old, whose school or childcare provider is closed. So you have to also consider the fact that a lot of daycares are closed, and traditionally your employees could come to work because they have daycare open. So what now you have to consider the fact that maybe one of your employees doesn't have daycare as an option anymore, or they don't have a family member that can step in. So these are things that you're going to have to really, and it's a definitely new territory, and it's a lot on employers and a lot on the business. But it's really important to have this open conversation and dialogue with your employees and do the best that you can given your circumstances. And we understand everybody's under very difficult financial pressures right now. Resources are very thin, and with the additional burden of having to then consider everybody's needs and stuff, it is a lot. But to protect yourself from these claims, because they are coming, and I'm personally seeing them coming in, to limit that exposure, it is important to just have that conversation and have that documentation, because in the back end, it could save you literally thousands of dollars. So just wanted to, I'm stressing that because it is something that we anticipate seeing a huge increase in litigation over a lot of these types of discrimination claims coming down the pipeline. Kind of the last area, there's two more areas I kind of want to touch on, and then before we open up for question and answer. But there's the OSHA aspect, as well as the wage and hour claims aspect. So OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, that's a federal. There's a state agency that also functions with similar regulations. And this goes back to some of the issues that Grasford was talking about. And there's a responsibility now, especially during this time, for employers to make sure that employees feel safe and that the workplace is safe for them to come back to. And while employees can't bring a suit under OSHA just for a general duty to keep your workplace safe, and also, the fact that OSHA can bring a potential lawsuit for against a company, but it is important that to remember that there is protections for employees, and they do have a right to sue a company for retaliation about complaining about an unsafe workplace. And this is why it's so crucial to have open dialogue and communications and policies. And so an employee can sue an employer because they said, you didn't make me feel safe. You didn't have masks. You weren't disinfecting. You weren't properly cleaning and hygiene and making sure hygiene was there. And if employer ignores those complaints and then ends up terminating that employee, they can say that the reason why I was terminated was because I was making these complaints in the workplace. So to minimize the risk of your employees feeling that the workplace isn't safe, it's important to constantly communicate a plan. This is what we're doing to make sure the workplace is safe. And here, and in a plan, you'll have policies regarding, signs and policies about disinfecting and how frequent the doorknobs are going to be cleaned, and that you're going to have staggered schedules, and you're sending out notices to employees. You're constantly communicating with them. And this is something that my firm has. We've created packages for our clients that lists out all the different policies in place for them to have for cleanliness, hygiene, masks. And we're able to tailor it to the specific needs of each business, depending on how especially if you have frontline employees versus back office employees, you may not need to do gloves if you're just sitting in your office, but maybe you just want to think about increase in hand sanitizer stations in high touch areas. So these are things that I want employers should be thinking about when it comes to cleanliness and making sure you have policies and procedures in place and that employees know that you're doing everything you can to keep them safe. Now, as far as touching on the last aspect for wage and hour claims, this can also come up in the return to work environment. For example, issues of certain exempt employees. Some companies and businesses had to lay off employees or had to transition employees to other duties or had to cut their salaries during the, the time when everybody was staying home and working. And it's important to remember that employees who are exempt from overtime and the record keeping requirements, that they have to both meet the salary basis test, which is $684 a week or $35,568 annually, and meet the duties test. So if an employee's duties have changed or their salary has dropped during this time frame, you may need to, I'm encouraging you to consider reclassifying an employer, just like looking at those duties, looking at the pay, and think about, do I need to reclassify this employee as a non-exempt and now they're open to getting overtime? So these are things that are potential wage and hour issues that linger that it's important to consider during this time. Also, furlough exempt workers, making sure that if you still have people who are furloughed, that they're not performing any work while they're furloughed. And that includes responding to emails. Employees can say that I still had to answer all my emails, I still had to pick up my phone and do text messages, and this was time that I was working. So it's important to make sure that furloughed employees are not performing work. Non-exempt workers who were telecommuting also do present concerns as to timekeeping, whether or not they're doing emails all of a sudden that they weren't clocked in for. So these are things you have to constantly be aware of, employees who are exempt and non-exempt. And just to kind of like tie everything up, because I know we want to make sure we leave some time for questions and answers. I just want to let you guys know that all of this really doesn't really come into play unless you have a plan. And just to reiterate what Grasford said and towards the end of his presentation, a lot of things can change. We can find ourselves right back into having to, close up depending on whether or not your business was considered essential. And it's important to have a plan to reopen and have policies and procedures in place, making sure you have forms for employees to fill out, ensuring that it's confidential, letting in HR and it's kept separate from their personal information. Anything that has medical information, it's important to know who are your vulnerable employees. Making sure that you think about who needs accommodations, documenting that. Having forms filled out for waivers if necessary, if you have a business where they're highly likely to interact with the public. Whether or not you want to do temperature checks. Each business is very, very different. And we're working with our clients, creating those policies and procedures and forms that are very specific to each business's needs. So with that said, we're going to open this up to any questions that you guys may have about, how to maneuver all of this during such, uncertain times. Thank you.
And thank you very much. And before we do that, I wanted to make a couple more comments to small businesses. I always tell the small businesses this: you need to have several people on your team to be a successful small business. You should always have a good accountant. You should always have a good insurance agent, but you need to also have a good lawyer. That needs to be a part of your toolkit. So whoever your lawyer is, now is the time to be having these types of conversations with them. The point is to minimize your risk. And I want to make this point. Now I'm going to take off my counselor hat and put on the advocacy hat. Everything that my colleague has discussed is all about minimizing your risk and even talking about how you send an email. I tell my clients that when you write an email in business, you should almost imagine that you're CCing that email to a judge. because ultimately we may be using that email to defend you, or it may be used offensively against you if it doesn't say what it needs to say. So that point that Tiffany made about the email is critical. You might have a conversation with someone, but it's probably prudent for you to document the things that you discussed, because that's ultimately what we can use to defend you. Anything that's in writing certainly carries a greater degree of weight than something that you said that somebody else may contradict. So that's just some general advice from an advocacy perspective that I wanted to make sure that you all are thinking about. Thanks.
Grasford, along those lines, you talked about the need for having an accountant, an insurance agent, lawyer. Can you just talk about, before we have a couple questions we did receive, but before we do that, the importance of being active in a chamber of commerce? What can a membership in a chamber of commerce do for a business?
Yes, thanks, Takesha. Great question. So I am currently the chair, rather the chair-elect or president-elect of the Black Chamber of Palm Beach County. But besides that particular chamber, I've been involved in other chambers and other professional trade associations. I think it's absolutely essential to be a part of groups like that, because invariably you will meet other business owners who may potentially be clients of yours. So there's a direct monetary benefit. There's a portion of it where you may share best practice ideas. Somebody may say, well, I'm dealing with this issue, and you find out that you're dealing with that very same issue, and you can learn from them and how they have addressed it. So I would encourage all businesses that you really can't be insular and just stay within the pocket of your business. You have to get out within the community and meet other business owners, and whether they be lawyers, doctors, whatever it may be. You just don't know how these connections can result in more business for your company. Thanks for that question, Takesha. It's a very good question.
All right, so the first question we received is, I guess we mentioned about having safety notices. Now, with our staff working and people working remotely, what do you recommend? The question is, do you recommend using virtual platforms for posting safety notices before reopening?
Tiffany, you want to get that?
Sure. So I want to make sure I understand the question. So whether or not to use like a feature such as like Zoom to announce safety notices that are going to go into effect at the actual physical work site. Does that your understanding of the question?
That's what I think the question's asking, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, especially, I would say if whatever, your employees, the best way of communicating with your employees. And I know right now, a lot of people have been using Zoom as a way to stay in touch and stay connected in lieu of being face-to-face with their staff. And to the extent that you feel like that's the best way of me connecting to my workforce is them seeing me and me reassuring them that I have a plan and this is the plan. And also, I think it's a great way to also hear their concerns about, and they may have questions for you about things that you may not have considered. So I think Zoom is a good way to get a good ear about how your workforce's concerns. And I also think it's a great way to also tell them your plan. And to follow that up, I would say then put that plan into writing that you can then say, based on the conversations we had and the concerns that were raised, here's our plan of action for reopening the office. And then you can lay it out in writing and you can send it out to your email, send it out via email. Another great resource or option is doing a survey. It's so many resources online for you to create your own survey, and employees can say, rank things or talk about, if I have like an issue, like they can write it out. But I definitely think it's a great resource to stay in touch with your community and thinking about like, what are my employees' concerns, and let them know I have a plan and I'm addressing them.
And I just want to emphasize, if your employees feel that they are a part of the development of the policies and procedures as you make these decisions, they will also feel a sense of ownership in that process. I mean, when you think about how decisions are made, the more you incorporate other people's feedback, the more invested they'll be also in seeing it succeed. And you may find them helping you to police others in terms of how it's implemented. So that's the reason why the survey and any sort of assessments you can do is important, and encouraging the employees to have an open door. I mean, to tell you what their concerns are, because the survey may reflect their views. It certainly reflects their views at that time, but that evolves over time, and their circumstances may change. So it should not be viewed as a static, one-time document. It really should be a living, breathing exercise that you all, engage in as you look at the reopening process.
Absolutely. And just to jump in on that, I think it's crucial that, to think about, not every employee is going to be comfortable speaking up in a group environment or on a Zoom. And you also have to think about privacy issues that they have, that they don't feel comfortable sharing personal health issues or family issues. And sometimes you don't even know if they too may have family members who were in a hospital for COVID-19, and they don't feel comfortable talking about that. So it's important to have different avenues for employees to express themselves, and letting them know that there's a public forum for anybody who wants to open dialogue, but also providing a private forum for them to feel that they can reach out and let you know what their concerns are, and also ensuring that their privacy and confidentiality is protected when you're having those conversations. Because some people, with all the noise, and we have to also realize that people have died because of this. People have lost friends, have lost loved ones, and that is still a reality for a lot of people. So it's a very sensitive subject, but making employees feel like they're part of it and that they're heard and understood is crucial to being successful during this time.
Okay. Our next question is from DJ's Home Repair Services. Hi, I own a small home repair business, DJ's Home Repair Service, with 1 to 2 employees. Should I be asking my customers whether they have any COVID symptoms before entering into their homes? He requires the employees to wear masks, but can he ask the customers if they've had any COVID symptoms before he and his employees enter their home?
I'm coming from an employer perspective. My take on that is always more so of like the protection of your employees, and that's number one. And it really comes down to the business and how crucial it is for you as a business person to know whether or not the environment that your employees are going into have, and whether or not they're going to be exposed. And unfortunately, it's basically almost impossible to constantly foresee and know exactly who has and who does not have symptoms. And I think it really comes down to a very specific business need and whether or not it's appropriate. I mean, my instinct is to say I would hesitate to necessarily like always ask, the homeowners or wherever you're going if they have that's my instinct. Because I think it's, as the company, as long as you're ensuring your employees are protected and that they have the personal protective equipment that they need, that is your true issue. That is where the true liability is, to make sure that you as a business also have a way of also communicating with your customers and letting your customers know that I am doing everything to make sure that you feel safe when we come into your home. So there's that front face and public side of things. And, and that's part of your, on your website when you're promoting yourself. And, we think about like, if you're going to eating in a restaurant, what restaurants are saying to you, like, look at what we're doing now. I'm getting stuff from emails from restaurants about all these things that we're doing now to make you feel safe. So I think from a business perspective, letting them know what you're doing, as well for the customer side, as well as letting your employees know from the employee side, that's where you minimize the liability and the risks. But as far as asking people, that really goes into very personal information, health issues, and I would caution against that.
And I agree with that. And for Ms. Jones, I think I would maybe flip that hypothetical. What if you knew that your employee had perhaps symptoms, but then they were going to potentially enter into a customer's home? But that customer, if that customer is later infected, have a claim against your business for the risk that may have been created by the employee entering the business. And I would say in that hypothetical, if you are aware of an employee that may be symptomatic or may have been exposed, I would caution against having that employee, even with protective measures, entering into the homes, because you may have liability from that third party. So, in terms of your specific hypothetical, even if the homeowner were to say, yes, we have not had any symptoms, there's probably really no way to reliably know if that's actually accurate. So that's the reason why what Tiffany said is important, because you're taking the measures you're taking to best safeguard them, because even if you ask a question, there's really no guarantee that what you're being told is accurate, or frankly, that they even know, because we know that a lot of folks are asymptomatic and have no idea that they may be carriers. So the information you get from that standpoint may be inherently defective anyways, just by virtue of the nature of the disease.
Okay. Another question we received on the Zoom is, as far as wearing masks and taking precautions with employees, is there a site or organization a business owner can reach out to in order to follow the suggested medical guidelines, such as how to wear a mask, type of mask to use, etc.?
What's the question? A
Can you
side
repeat that?
organization?
Say it again?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. As far as wearing masks and taking precautions with employees, is there a site or organization a business owner can reach out to in order to follow the suggested medical guidelines, such as how to wear a mask, the type of mask to use?
I do know the CDC website does have resources for companies, businesses regarding safety. They're just general overview of types of things that employers can use as far as safety. But this is something that is very specific to each business needs. But if you just want like general information about how to wear a mask, what types of masks, those types of things like that, there's I've seen that stuff on the CDC guideline website. But then as far as specific policies and procedures in place, as far as using those measures and how to implement that is often a conversation that I'm having with my clients as their counselor, as far as now, okay, yes, we have the mask, yes, we have the hand sanitizer. Now, what's the plan? What should I require my employees to do? That's usually where an attorney or advisor, whoever it is that you turn to, or consultant, depending on the size of your company, comes in and helps you create those frameworks of implementing that. So that's what I would say from an employee perspective side.
Yeah, and one of the things that our firm Ackerman is doing for our clients, we've developed various toolkits. I know this was alluded to earlier, that things that are commonly used, or things that sort of are you can leverage through a form.
Mhm.
We've created these toolkits to help clients with some of these types of issues, furlough letters. I mean, the survey that we've mentioned, just to name a few. Those are some of the things that are available
Yeah.
to our clients. But as I said to you before, I highly encourage you to have a lawyer, whoever you choose on your team, to go over these issues because, as Tiffany said, there is no one size fits all. We are giving sort of general guidelines, but in your specific instance, for your particular business, your attorney will tailor the advice to you specifically. So just keep that in mind in terms of what we've discussed.
We have one last question. Is it okay if a business owner requires a patron to use a mask, or they'll be denied entry into the business?
I could start off here. I have not seen any specific prohibition to a store owner taking those kinds of measures. Tiffany may know that more directly than I do, but I have not seen that. I can tell you that as late as yesterday, there's a gas station directly across the street from where I live that has those signs. I will also tell you that people have not been adhering to those signs. They've still been walking in without masks, but I'm not aware of an affirmative obligation on the part of the store owner. Are you, Tiffany?
My recommendation is to whatever, if you're dealing with the public and people are coming in, make sure that you're meeting the guidelines for your area. Each county is doing, I know Broward County's mask requirement is different from Palm Beach mask requirement. So at a minimum, if there is a requirement that people in the public wear masks and your business is open to the public, obviously you want to make sure you are doing things that are in compliance with local regulations on that. And so I would advise that whatever it is that you're doing as far as requiring people to do, make sure it is aligned with what is in effect at that time. And this is where it comes in with attorneys. We are constantly literally checking as these things are changing. Every day I get an email, Governor DeSantis' new order came out. Broward County, Palm Beach County just released this new update with reopening and phases. So this is where everybody is tasked with keeping updated on the latest developments and then making those adjustments. Like, okay, maybe last week, Palm Beach County required every person walking into a business to wear a mask, but that's changing next week. And then you're gonna have to shift appropriately. And if things go backwards, you're gonna have to go back again. So it's important to stay up to date with what's being said and what the latest updates are, and just making sure that your policies and rules are aligned appropriately with what is required for the general public.
So, and I just want to piggyback on that. What Tiffany said, the key phrase I heard was at a minimum. So the question becomes, if you want to be more careful, more restrictive than the government is now allowing you to do, can you do that? And my instinct, I haven't specifically researched it, is if you wanted to have enhanced safety measures, my instinct tells me that probably would be something that you are entitled to as a business owner to do. But I want to be careful. I have not specifically researched that issue to be certain of that.
Yeah, and I would echo the same thing. And I'm just thinking about let's think about a nursing home environment. Whether or not visitors can come in, and you own nursing homes, and you're dealing with a high risk population. So Broward County may say, okay, you don't have to wear masks anymore when you go out to public, but you run a nursing home and majority of the people, your patients are over 65. you're going to have to sit down and think about what is my policies and procedures going to be for visitors coming in, knowing that there's still no vaccine out there. And this is where the unique business, each situation is very unique, very different. And then you're also thinking about the CDC guidelines, the fact that I have patients who fall within a vulnerable group. So the fact that as an employer who owns nursing homes, you would think about, I have a legitimate business need to keep my patients safe. And so if you can point to legitimate things that is unique to your business, and this is where having a lawyer sit down and really critically think about who are your customers, who are your patients, who are your clients, do they fall within these categories? The more you can show support that they fall within these protected categories, the more likely you can justify having these additional protections in place. Because you're limiting, the last thing you want to do is receive the outbreaks in nursing homes. You don't want to put your vulnerable clients in a situation where they are, at higher risk of a direct threat. So these are the kind of conversations that would have to happen with an attorney while you're figuring out how much more beyond the regular regulatory requirements do I need to go to protect my business.
Thank you. And just, the Palm Beach County government website is pretty much updated every day with any new administrative orders that are the executive orders or actually local orders. So that's a good place to check as a baseline to see what's required if your business is located in Palm Beach County. Can one of you give us Ackerman's website? I know we mentioned that they have a number of resources available for the public. And so if people want to check those resources out, the Ackerman website is?
It's very easy. It's www.akerman.com. There is a coronavirus page that has been created for the public that has very up-to-date information as to what we've been gathering, and that's open to the public. If anybody wants to reach out to either Tiffany or I, they should feel free to do so after this presentation if they want us to help them more specifically.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the information we received today. It was very helpful. It was very thoughtful. And I think it will be very helpful to Palm Beach County businesses, big and small, as they reopen in phase 1, phase 2, and whatever phases their future will be. But thank you so much, Grasford and Tiffany, for your presentation today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.